If you played Destiny 2 for any amount of time, stepped away, and then came back today, you would have a hard time understanding the game that you're playing. We have all these wild new darkness powers, an endless supply of increasingly powerful weapons, and the ability to merge the aspects and fragments from all 5 subclasses at once. However, with the addition of all of these, we still have dungeons in the game that feel like they're stuck in 2018. Recently, Bungie refreshed and updated 3 featured dungeons for their Rite of the 9 event. And it got me thinking, what would it look like to update the other dungeons to give them that modern treatment? So today, I'm here to lay out exactly what I would do to update the Shattered Throne, Pit of Heresy, Grasp of Avarice, and Duality dungeons for the modern game. I'm going to talk about encounter fixes, quality of life upgrades, and one brand new feature that could change PvE gameplay forever. Now, 2 quick things I want to lay out before I get into the video. First off, you can listen or watch this. I will have a presentation up on the screen, kind of kicking it old school, going back to college days and throwing a presentation together. However, you can just listen to this as a podcast if you'd like, and kind of let me know what you think after you listen to it. Secondly, I'm not going to be touching on the loot from these dungeons. All the loot needs to be brought up to relevant terms, because that's the only reason we would go back and play them, regardless of the effort that the devs put in. And then I'm going to be assuming that you know the base mechanics of these dungeons today. So first up, we have the Shattered Throne dungeon. As the first dungeon we ever received, Shattered Throne is a masterpiece of tone. And upon entering for the first time, it would be understandable for a Guardian to feel uneasy about seeing this giant taken castle in the Ascendant plane and just imagining the horrors that are within. This dungeon provided so much mystery, intrigue, and this air of uneasiness on early clears. But in today's game, its mechanics feel dated, the loot feels undesirable, and the lack of modern quality of life features can make the pacing kind of feel like a slog. So let's talk about some of the top level changes that I would implement to improve quality of life and bring the dungeon to the modern era. For quality of life, we would start with adding rally banners before each encounter to make sure that we have our abilities and ammo. Next, we'd take a fine-tooth comb to the lighting to provide further clarity without killing the aesthetic. And finally, we would add a skylight in the first encounter to show general areas of where the symbols are to cleanse. And we'll talk more about that here in a few. For modernizing changes, I would add in new dire taken enemies from episode Heresy. I would add Stalker Knights to follow and brood behind you as you navigate. So those knights that we kill in the final encounter, spoiler alert, I would take them, give them immunity, and give them the ability, like, that they can't be killed by us at that point. Similar to the Ascendant Challenge in the Dreaming City, where they're kind of chasing you and you're kind of navigating through that. I would add that to give an air of dread as you're moving through. So let's talk about some of the changes that I would make for the opening encounter Erebus. So for the opening encounter, I would choose to reduce the number of symbols needed from 6 to 3. I would also shake up the encounter by introducing a taken eye mechanic, where you carry the eye between rooms to cleanse taken orbs. This would be a shootable relic, similar to Vow of the Disciples' third encounter, where you could move through and you would be able to, kill enemies, lower level enemies that are in front of you, but you would have to be creative on how you wanted to navigate and get around some of the higher tier enemies. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I would add a beam of light in the sky that would help indicate the direction you need to go to cleanse the symbols. I'm not saying that we need to put a waypoint in there, but giving the ability for Guardians who might be struggling or might be unfamiliar to know where they're going, that could be very helpful. And then you could even time this encounter on higher difficulties if we're talking about ultimatum modes or contest modes or anything of that sort. Highly doubt we would do a contest mode for something like a returning dungeon like Shattered Throne, an actual contest mode, but this is something where you could definitely iterate on it and give the ability to put some emphasis on how fast you're doing this encounter. So the encounter flow would go like this. You kill the opening mini boss, you spawn the taken eye, so it would spawn where that boss dies, or just in the center of the arena where the boss would spawn. You take that shootable taken relic Remember, this is like the Val third encounter relic, and you're moving symbol to symbol with that. So you're going, you would see the symbol floating there. You would go to where it tells you to, head that direction. You're killing little enemies that are around you. However, you're going to have to dodge snipers. You're going to have to dodge a lot of the bigger enemies if you're by yourself. If you're with a teammate, just have them escort you. You get to the next area, you would use your grenade ability to cleanse the taken orb that's there. Again, similar to Val third encounter. I'm taking that functionality as a reference. And then you would continue that. You'd do that 3 times, cleanse 3 of the 6 instead of all 6, and then you would traverse finally back to the exit area where you drop down to continue through the dungeon. So that's how I would change the first encounter. Now let's talk about the traversal section between first and second encounter. I would keep this portion mostly untouched beyond adjustment of enemy scaling for various difficulties. And that's kind of the theme that I have across the board here. I would just make sure that we scale the enemy health and the difficulty there of dealing with them properly. The first throwaway, it always gives a sense of uneasiness, especially when you do it for the first time. And they take like your abilities away and the fact that you can't like double jump, things of that sort. And this would be a great place to introduce one of those brooding knights that I was talking about earlier. So as you're navigating through, having a knight that could you'd hear it growling and making sounds behind you. And then finally, when you get into the Vorgeth and Dolan Karu encounters, here's how I would change them. I would start by ensuring both bosses have a rally banner, properly scaled health pools. I would continue the implementation of the dire taken enemies. I would bring forward that taken eye mechanic from the first encounter, and then I would take the finite thought buff from Dolan Karu and I would add that to Vorgeth to provide some UI clarity. So basically, it's going to be the same mechanic. So let's say this, for Vorgeth, you would drop down from where the rally banner would be placed. It's the same place that you would spawn in if you wipe inside of the Vorgeth encounter. Rally, drop down, you kill a mini boss, it would create a taken eye, and then you would kind of do the same rinse and repeat that you did in the first. You would take that taken eye, you would navigate between the 4 sides of the room, you would cleanse a taken orb, kill an enemy. However, when you kill those enemies, that is when you would have the finite thought buff that would spawn. Pick up that buff, and you're going to do that until you get the new finite vision buff. So basically, grabbing 4 finite thoughts will give you finite vision, and that can be used alongside the taken eye to do a new super ability, which would bring down the boss's shield. Basically, I'm merging together the relic shield from Vault of Glass and the taken eye. In that mechanic, think Templar, like when you bring the shield down. So it'd be a very similar mechanic, just firing an overcharged shot from that. Due to the size of the Dolan Karu boss arena, I would forego that taken orb cleansing portion where you have to go around and utilize the grenade ability to do all that. I feel like that might take too much time, especially on solo encounters, kind of put you in this very vulnerable state. However, we would do the exact same thing where you would kill the knights in the room, and then you would pick up the finite thought. It would turn into the taken eye, which then you could use the super ability once you have finite vision to bring down Dolan Karu's shield. So that's how I would change this. Same idea of needing to kill all 3 of the knights. They're going to still do the same teleporting mechanic, all of that stuff. My goal is to keep the nature of the encounters the same, and especially with Dolan Karu, I want it to still keep the nature of being like a sprint to the finish rather than a long winding mechanic heavy encounter. So these changes I know are a bit lofty, but I feel like the distance and time between like the initial release and now makes big swings necessary to bring it up. So let's move on to our second dungeon of the day, Pit of Heresy, which originally released with Shadowkeep back in October of 2019. This dungeon is unique for the newly implemented at the time mechanic of using a hive sword in a variety of ways, depending on what type of enemy you're trying to kill. So if it was the shriekers, you're blocking. If it was the wizards, you were doing a ranged attack with your right click, or whatever the ranged attack on the controller is. It's been a minute for me. Or you were blocking damage and then doing light swings on the knight. And so I think that there's some room to expand this mechanic and kind of build off of what Bungie had already done. Let's talk about first the top level changes I would make, and then we'll get into the encounter specific. So for quality of life, you got to add rally banners to this one. I'd also at a base level just ensure Guardians aren't going to die when they go up the elevator with the Relic Sword. I know that they've said they fixed this, and people may say that they think it's fixed, whatever. There have still been times where you get left absolutely one shot, and if you get shot by an enemy because of that, and you die, that feels really bad. So we're going to avoid that at all costs. Modernization, here's what I would change. I think we could craft a narrative reason to revisit the pit and introduce in the Lucent Hive. I would also introduce an elemental matching mechanic similar to the post Final Shape campaigns where you have like the Hive runes with the elements. And so there's a variety of ways to interact with this. Some are orb dunking, some are orb throwing, some are reflecting the damage in a similar way. And so that is something I would do. And so let's talk about the Necropolis opening encounter. This encounter would stay very similar mechanically. We would adjust it to provide greater variety of like gameplay and moment to moment basis. I would start by ensuring that there were consistent and predictable sword bearer spawns. I find that when I've ran this back recently, that's one thing. It's like I'm very familiar with this dungeon, but getting in there and not knowing where a sword bearer is going to come when I need that sword, and then especially on higher difficulties, if those were added, it could put you in a position where enemy spawn and you're just frustrated feeling that way. And there's no reason for that. It's like, just give them predictability so we know where they spawn. And then that's something that people who really want to optimize and go the distance with this dungeon, they can learn those and they can optimize even further. So I would also replace the mechanic of killing pit keepers, which are the enemies that are outside of the different doors, keeping them shut in the original version of the dungeon. I would replace them with these shields that we were talking about, these rune or these elemental shields that would allow you to break them by deflecting damage. So I just think that's kind of a nicer method of, I don't know, not necessarily even nicer, just a little different, just refreshing. After 6 years, it's time to refresh it. Inside the room, I would utilize 3 different Hive Guardians, similar to Ghosts of the Deep, just split them up, have, the Acolyte, the Wizard, and then the Titan, essentially. And then we're going to utilize a new mechanic, which would be a parrying mechanic, and you could only parry these enemies, and you could only parry their super abilities, okay? So essentially how I think this would play out, you go into the room, you dispatch all of the enemies that are in there, you defeat them, get rid of all the trash ads. At that point, the Hive Guardian is going to go into their super, right? That's kind of what naturally happens. They may even do it a little before that, but their supers come back pretty quickly. If you do a perfectly timed block, then that would reflect that back in a highly magnetic blast, right? Like we're not necessarily having to aim the parry. I would have all 3 enemies be able to take all 3 types of damage. However, I don't think any of these are going to do like the sheer just like non-stop barrage damage that the Shrieker does. So it's not going to be as effective to do like holding block the entire time. But you sit there and you interact with this new parry mechanic on the super ability of these enemies, and you can chunk them down, hit a finisher on them just like you always would, and at that point it will break the seal, and you move between the 3, and that's how we would change the first encounter. Now let's talk the transition between 1 and 2, which is known as the Tunnels of Despair. So for this area, I would just have elemental orbs that need to be dunked. And so when you drop down, you would see symbols like this in the opening area. This is a screenshot of the opening area, Tunnels of Despair. There is a hallway in this picture that's unseen that you can go to the left, and that's the outside, kind of around the cliff side. You can go down the middle, which you can kind of see on the left side of that column there, and then the right-hand side, which is the rightmost. So if you are familiar with the encounter, there are multiple rooms, multiple orbs, and so what we would do is we would statically assign the elements to those different rooms, and then we would just go ahead and give this ability for these runes from left to right to show these colors and symbols. The symbols don't really matter as much as the colors do, and so you're dunking and you just need the same flavor. So finally, let's talk the last 3 portions of this: totems, the Harrow, and Zulmak. So we'll start with totems. For totems, the primary threat is the speed at which you need to play, and it certainly makes the encounter tougher for solo players than fire teams. So a possible way to tweak this is to have some sort of like behind the scenes running cooldown, meaning when a Guardian steps onto the plate, they need to hold it, but if they just stay there, they're camping there, we're trying to like chain wells and stuff on on the plate, it's going to turn into some sort of toxic environment, whether it's fire that burns through the well or through a rift and things of that sort, or whether it is, some sort of toxic thinking, King's Fall, that mechanic, but just giving you the ability where you do have to be moving, you do have to be off the plate at various times and kind of doing this thing. So it's this ebb and flow, right? Of what you should be doing for the encounter is coming in, you kill the first set of acolytes that are there, worshiping around, you step on the plate, that will spawn in the first knight, you go kill the knight, you come back to the plate, step on the plate, then dunk, step on the plate, kill the knight. Like, you're holding down the plate long enough to make sure it resets and it doesn't wipe you. But we're trying to avoid a situation where we have bolt charge titans just sitting on there, just behind their shield, refreshing all the time based on whatever ability is on the artifact at that moment, or, just trying to avoid static gameplay in this room. So let's talk about the Harrow. The Harrow is the portion where you have the 3 hive symbols when you drop down that pit of death that has all the obstacles and things. You're dropping straight down, and then you get to the bottom, you see them, and then you kind of have to navigate and kill the wizards. So essentially it's going to be the same there, but I would just say, you just add elemental dunking mechanic. You could just do that and you would see the symbols in a similar manner to this here for the Tunnels of Despair. You could see these symbols laid out, and then you would be able to go into the room. The map would remain the same, and you would just recognize the symbol. You would go kill them, and we would have it plastered all over the place. So it would be very obvious when you get to an area that, okay, this is the solar, this is the void, this is the arc. So finally, for Zulmak, I would take the mechanic of how we had to handle the rooms in first encounter, and I would just drop those 3 hive guardians into the spires. For some extra difficulty, I would place a barrier around the entrances of the room. So once you enter, you can't get out until you finish off the hive guardian. So you don't have to rush in there. There's no timer, but you have to, once you go in, you're in. Like, this is a fight. I'm thinking like a light inspiration of an Elden Ring situation, you got the fog of war all over the walls. Like, I'm stepping in there, I'm doing this thing. And so again, we're still going to have the parry mechanic where you go in there. And when I'm talking like the parry mechanic, if you can master this parry mechanic, it may take 2 parries to kill this boss, or to kill this hive guardian. And I would just say, once you get comfortable with it, it's going to speed up the encounter so much, and it's going to give some needed. I mean, right now you go run Pit of Heresy, it's a snooze fest. You walk in there and it's like maybe the hive wizard, because she can slow you and throw out the poison, but it's pretty much a snooze fest at this point. So I think this adds a little bit of, okay, time to sit up in my chair, especially early times doing it. So I think that the actual fight of Zulmak, for example, the Cursed Thralls, the fire attacks he throws, the wipe action he performs, I think all those are suitable for today, but we do need him to have more health so we can face a greater challenge during the fight. So I think it's one of those things where we don't necessarily need to scale it up where like a 1 phase is impossible or something of that sort. And obviously it's never impossible, but I'm talking about for normal fire teams. Right now, any fire team can 1 phase, especially if you got 3 guardians. Anyone can 1 phase Zulmak, but you get in there, and I think just have him be beefed up a little bit, give him a little more oomph behind it. And so, I mean, it might even be a situation we do the Lucent Hive where we swap it out for something, but I like Zulmak. I think that this is a good boss. I love the fire attacks that he throws out. I like the white mechanic at the end where he stabs into the ground and you got to get out at a certain point. And I think the mid encounter Cursed Thrall, I don't think that's necessarily a hard thing, because you can kill one of them, it'll explode all of them, especially with rocket sidearms and such. But I think that it's a good mechanic where you have to be cognizant. You can't just like turn your brain off and start doing damage and stuff. You're going to wipe at that point if you all get caught off guard. So that's all I have for Pit of Heresy. And if you're enjoying this breakdown, consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Whether or not you agree with my opinions, let me know in the comment section below. I would love to talk to you about it, and let me know how you would update these dungeons, you think I got right, what I got wrong, and we'll kind of continue from there. So dungeon number 3 is Grasp of Avarice, which was released in December of 2021 with Bungie's 30th anniversary event. With this being a newer dungeon, there's only one slight quality of life change that I would make, but that's to enhance the UI surrounding the engram banking mechanic. I would add some sort of like UI indicator that's going to show on the screen, maybe even when you look at the crystal, and it's going to tell you how many you've dunked and how many are needed. So literally I'm saying, like, if something needs it, it would be like 0 over 60, and then you just walk up there and you dunk, get close to it, and you can remember how many you've done. The essence of Grasp of Avarice is managing and tempering our greed for loot. And so I think the best thing we could do for this dungeon, aside from scaling enemies, scaling boss health, things of that sort, is adding what I've dubbed the new greed overcharge system. So this would provide some risk and reward factor to the existing mechanics. And here's how this would work. So the greed overcharge system would have you picking up 10 engrams to regain all your abilities, just like you currently do. If you pick up more than 15 engrams, it would grant you additional ability damage with diminishing returns up to 20. So getting that 15th would, give you a substantial boost. I don't have percentages in mind, but I'm saying we boosted up to a normal level. We're not going out of band with this mechanic. However, this would be a situation where you in theory could go out of band just because it would be so specifically focused on this dungeon, and it obviously wouldn't be anywhere else in the game. So when you get to 15 up to the 20 mark, it would grant additional ability damage, only ability damage, with diminishing returns up to that 20. So the first one would be the most, and then you don't necessarily have to push it too far beyond that. And then picking up over 20 would give you the risk reward of, obviously you can dunk more. So that is the first reward. Like you're getting this ability damage buff, but you're also getting the fact that you can dunk more, you can do the encounter faster. But you risk unleashing, I've dubbed just a suppressing blast out of the crystal, basically because you're dunking too many engrams at the same time. So let's talk about how this would actually work in some of these encounters. So let's talk about the Ogre encounter, the Phrygia encounter. This would remain largely unchanged. However, you would have that in there. So you go into the various rooms. I know right now a lot of Guardians, they'll go in, they'll use their super when they get in the room to just clear the ads really quickly, pick up 10, get their abilities back. They'll pick up as many as they can, and then they'll run straight to the next room. Well, you end up in a situation where you can risk it and you can get that ability damage up. And to be clear, I want these buffs and these things to activate when you dunk the moat. So you kind of get in this situation where ideal situation would be you finish with 19 engrams because you wouldn't necessarily risk it by hitting that 20 threshold, but you'd hit that 19 engram mark, dunk that would allow to push you into the next phase. You'd have the highest amount of ability damage. You could use your super to begin the damage phase and go from there. But if you go in there and you're like, well, I like running through doing whatever, you snag more than that 20, you're risking. And so what I would say is it starts somewhere around like a 1 in 10 chance. And so the suppressing thing, that it would stop you from using your abilities, but it wouldn't remove them from you. So I'm thinking like a Tormentor type attack. I'm thinking like some sort of Hive Guardian, the grenade from the Hive Guardian. And so it would prevent you from using your abilities instantaneously. And so there's just a risk associated to that. I would also, you could even take it a step further and have that blast go out when you finish filling up the crystal. That's something that could work. So you don't know until the very end if you hit it or not. And so that's really all I would change about the Ogre encounter. But let's talk about the Mind's Traversal encounter. So some people may not even know this exists because you just haven't interacted with it. But in the Mind's Traversal area, there are these buttons that can be pressed that will extend your time for shorter amounts. And then you go through, and as you're driving, you will land into like the A, B, and C like dismantling fields. What I would do is make sure that at least one of the buttons have been pressed to activate these fields. And so it just gives you the ability. Now, these are not highly out of the way. Actually, a lot of them are placed in pretty safe locations for you to drive, for you to cross into. And so I would suggest going after them anyways. But if you're doing that, I would say as you're driving, you hit one button and then you're able to go to the field. You don't have to stay in there long. Fun tip for you, when I go into the fields, I always swap my Sparrow out because I don't want to get it blown up. And so I will hop off as I'm getting in there, decrypt it, and then pull my next Sparrow out and send it. So let's talk about the encounter that would be the most substantially changed, which would be the Fallen Shield encounter, or better known as the Servitor Cannon or the Islands encounter, whatever you want to call it. I would allow for 3 islands at random to be active at once with just the base mechanic, Servitor on the field, and then you have just a bunch of fallen enemies around them. Kill the fallen enemies, pick up the engrams, dunk them in the crystal, just in the same way that we always have. Crystal would work the same way it works everywhere else. If you dunk too many at the same time, you risk the suppression, but you could have your abilities up, if you want to do some heavy ad clear, grenades, melees, things of that sort. I mean, those enemies go down very fast, but I mean, we'll take the buff, right? After 3 shields are broken, so they can happen instantly, you can send all your fire team to the different locations, get them done. After that happens, what I would suggest is that we take inspiration from how Bungie has changed some of these Rite of the Nine dungeons, and we would put a servitor level boss in the middle of the arena. This boss would put up a shield that would basically sequester itself into the center, and the only way to get through that shield is to utilize the cannon. So here's how I would imagine this going. You send your team to 3 different islands. As you're crossing to the islands, you send the first servitor up, the second servitor up, the third servitor up, and you break the 3 shield generators that need to be broken. Once that shield for the hot air balloon or whatever that's above, you could have the boss descend down. Once the boss gets down to that central island, I would have the boss generate a shield around it, and then all of the cannons would point towards that. And so from any island, you would be able to hop into a cannon, shoot yourself through, and then get in there to do damage. And then what I would have on the boss's health pool, now the boss, it's not going to have that much health. It's going to be similar to the paracausal invader that we see in Prophecy that you would kill as you're moving through the wasteland, stuff of that sort. And I would say that there's a threshold of damage where you push past it, and it doesn't block you off at all, but if you don't kill within a certain amount of time after crossing that threshold, that the boss does its teleport mechanic similar to the public events that we have on like the EDZ and Nessus and stuff of that sort. And so just would send you to a random island. It's just a little bit of a, oh, we didn't hit it or we didn't kill it in time. Then you just use the cannon and get back in there. So I think that would be kind of a cool thing. You'd still get loot from it and do that, but it would probably cut the encounter down by a quarter. You'd still have a lot of traversing around the different islands, doing stuff of that sort. You can move between the islands that way, but to get to the center, you do have to use the cannon to get through there. So let's talk about the final encounter now. Captain Avarice. The only piece of this encounter that I think really needs to be tweaked is the health of the mini boss enemies. RM80 and Grisprax. Man, they're both beefy, and so I think we're a little spoiled because in the beginning, a lot of us will rush in and then we will use our super. We'll use some sort of ability immediately to get rid of them and then pick up the motes that Grisprax drops and dunk them in the crystal. However, when you just get done, you used all your abilities, all your ammo for the second round, man, it can be a slog. It can be a pain to take care of them, especially the shank, just because it's a sniper, it's a tracer shank, and it will just destroy you. So I think that we should add the ability to do increased ability damage to these enemies. And I also think that we should give them some sort of elemental shield. So if we match the shield type, could do larger chunks of damage and kind of stun them a little bit and kind of give you that functionality there. So that's something I would do to swap it. But a part of it's just like get good. Like we got to figure out ways to get around that. And so that's kind of where I'm at too. So I would really, really like to see how Guardians would utilize this greed overcharge system. I would love to playtest it and get in there and kind of implement it and see how that would actually flesh out and see what people would, the crazy things that people could do with it. And maybe it's not that broken to say, hey, if someone's going to risk and reward it, just give them the ability to full send it, and you get 3 Star Eater Nova Bomb Warlocks that have 19 engrams dunking at the same time and just go ham. That could be really, really fun to see. So finally, we've reached our final dungeon for the day, Duality. Now, this is the most recent dungeon that's come out, but there are a few things that need to be fixed. We'll start by ensuring the mechanics of the dungeon are tightly tuned, and there's no longer accidental deaths like upon the bell activation. No one-shot disintegrations from the backpacks. Like it's cool if they leave you one shot from like the physics engine, a similar vibe. But I can't die just straight from 100 health to dead from the backpacks when they're left everywhere. And you may say, Sax, get good. I understand, and I'll try everything in my power to take care of them. But the amount of times where you're just in the midst of it and someone just dies because Keitel during the boss damage phase stomps her foot down and something of that sort, it just feels brutal. And finally, let's make sure that we can properly transport and grab our loot after killing the final boss. The amount of times that I've spent just like waiting in the Nightmare Realm and it tries to send me over and over and over again and then it just fails. It's ridiculous at this point. We got to figure out how to fix that. And I know they've tried a couple of times. It's just not worked. My next update, though, I know it's not a novel thing to the gaming space, but it's something that I think that could genuinely shake up Destiny gameplay, especially in-game PvE gameplay, to its core. In Destiny, we desperately need a content-aware ping system that would allow us to communicate in a broad variety of ways and relay information to our teammates without being able to verbally talk. Now, you know, I'm the LFG guy. I'm the dude who says, hey, you need to basically take a risk, get out there, and put yourself out there for LFG. But this is something that I feel like could be a great accessibility feature for people who, you know, maybe disabled gamers who have difficulty with like verbal communication. And this could break down language barriers in the player base, giving a broader appeal of, hey, this posting from a Chinese player or, someone across the world, it's like we can interact with each other now and not have to worry because Bungie has given us the tools to do that. And so Fireteam Finder was the first step. I think that this is a great next step. It could be a filter inside of Fireteam Finder and say, ping system, ping system only, something of that sort, and give you the ability. And I will admit, after recently playing the Destiny Rising equivalent of the raid and having teammates relay boss damage crit points to me with an in-game HUD just in the top right of my screen, I won't stop harping about this. This needs to be a thing in Destiny. I will keep talking about this. How would this actually work in the game, and what would this look like? So what I mean by a content aware is meaning that when you're looking in a certain direction and you hit your ping button, the game should be able to understand what you're looking at, what you're trying to ping. It could be a crosshair placement thing. It could be a priority of what is in your field of view and what could you be trying to relay information to based on the activity you're doing. So this could look like the standards inside of Duality. This could look like bells trying to tell your teammate, hey, we got to go. You got to come here, get to the bell. Or just letting teammates know where enemies are. The Galron encounter, the Galron can kind of tuck away, or Scions can hide around the corner. If you see them or you're trying to indicate, you could, ping and do that. And then obviously we got to give a radial system of some sort so that when you get a ping, you can communicate back to that. Obviously, there's levels to that. And this is also something that I know is not easy. And I'm sure there's been plenty of hours spent inside of Bungie HQ talking about this. But I truly think this would be game-changing and would open up the door for further, in-game PvE experiences inside the Destiny community. Aside from these quality of life changes, I'll be honest, I don't have a ton of changes that I would make to the dungeon mechanically. I really, really like Duality. There's a lot of the little rough edges we need to smooth off, but some things that we could optimize for, I would just say we remove the need to manipulate the dungeon in certain ways. Like in first encounter, you may not be aware, but there's an instance where if you go into the Nightmare Realm, you kill a Scion, you pick up that standard, and then you kill the other Scion, it will drop its standard, but you don't pick it up. When you come back, you can pick up the standard without killing the Scion the second time. And so what this allows you to do is you increase your timer of being in the Nightmare Realm every time a Scion dies. That is the point at which Bungie gives you more time. And so you can manipulate it by basically leaving the Scion up. And then as you're going through the little side hallway where you kill all the shadows of Galron and you're making your way to boss DPS, you just, in the process of that, you kill the Scion and you get an extra, it might be 15, 20 seconds. And so that's a lot of DPS time inside of an encounter. And so that can push things from a 2-phase to a 1-phase for a fire team. That can push things from a 3-phase to a 2-phase for a solo player. I just say remove the need to exploit this. Just give us more time while we're in there, and I think you're better. I don't there is a level to like the novelty of saying, well, I learned this, and I don't take something away that I learned and did that, and I understand, but it's one of those things where I think it's more fun to take the overall encounter and then shorten it, because you can grab both standards and then you can dunk both of them, and then you go through, and especially as a fire team, grabbing both of them, moving faster and get to boss DPS. So the second thing I would do is I would just swap in the Keitel encounter. The second thing I would do is I would remove the need to shoot the center crystal to trigger DPS, and then the bell behind you to teleport faster. So let me explain. So when you're going to damage, you've grabbed all the standards, you've dunked them out in the main world. You need to shoot the crystals there. You can see that indicated on the screen. You shoot the crystals to be teleported into the Nightmare Realm. When you do that, it teleports you and Keitel into the Nightmare Realm, and that's how you start DPS. However, right now, as the dungeon is today, if you shoot that crystal and then you turn around and shoot one of the bells, that will teleport you faster into the Nightmare Realm than Keitel does, giving you the ability to kill some of the bell keepers. You know, you have the 6 bell keepers, 2 sets for each bell. That will give you the ability to get in there and start doing that faster. And so you can be there ahead of time. You may not have known that was a thing. However, I think they should just don't make that a bug, make it a feature. And just allow, when you shoot the crystal, just put the Guardians in there a little faster. Give us the ability to get our bearings and do that, because it feels so bad. It takes a long time to get to damage, especially solo. It can take inexperienced Guardians a long time to get to damage. And so the idea of getting in there and then not realizing which way Keitel's going to go, her getting to the bell and immediately teleporting back, and you have to rinse and repeat, feels bad. Just give us a few extra seconds, 2-3 seconds maximum, whatever the equivalent of how fast you could shoot the crystal and turn around and shoot the bell, whatever that difference is, give that to us. And I think that would be a great quality of life change. So I hope you guys enjoyed this breakdown. Again, I hope you listened to it. You know, you can watch it, but I hope maybe you took some time to do some other things, get some housework done, listen to it. Let me know in the comments if you like this kind of stuff. I like making this kind of stuff. Laying out some of the things that I would do, if I was helping develop and giving feedback on the game. And so let me know, what do you think about my changes that I suggest here? What did I miss? What did I swing on and hit out of the park? What did I just swing and miss and strike out completely? And until next time, be blessed.